far this week, we've been talking about goals and how they can support our well-being. To this point, we've focused on how to choose the kinds of goals most likely to support our well-being. In this section, we want to focus on how to follow through on the goals we have chosen. We will begin by talking about hope theory, and then move to the work of Gabriela Oettingen and her book, Rethinking Positive Thinking. So, let's start with hope theory. Hope theory was created by Rick Snyder, who was a professor of psychology at the University of Kansas. More recently, hope theory has been developed further by Shane Lopez, who wrote the book Making Hope Happen. Back in 1994, Snyder published a book titled The Psychology of Hope, You Can Get There From Here. In that book, he defines hope as, quote, the sum of the mental willpower and way power that you have for your goals, end quote. This definition has three key terms: goals, willpower, and way power. To understand what Snyder means by those terms, it can be helpful to think of hope in connection with the journey implied by the subtitle of his book, You Can Get There From Here. The there he is referring to is represented by your goals. Your goals are the destination of your journey. The willpower is the fuel you will use to get there, and the way power is the map you will need to figure out how to get there. This definition of hope admittedly doesn't capture the full meaning of the hope that humans have felt and written about for millennia. It's probably not as full and rich as the hope that, in Alexander Pope's words, quote, springs eternal in the human breast. But it does provide a powerful way of understanding the things we hope for and how we can move toward them. And it can help give us insights into what may be holding us back from moving forward toward our goals. To move toward our goals effectively, we need to have a clear sense of what our goals are, plenty of motivation to move toward them, and enough alternate routes that we can continue to move forward even when one pathway is blocked. If any one of these three components is missing, we are unlikely to be able to make real the things we hope for. Earlier this week, I mentioned that when I was in school, I thought if only I knew what my goals were, I would throw myself fully into their realization. In the terms of hope theory, I had plenty of willpower and way power, but my hope was stymied because I didn't have clear goals. I had plenty of gas in my car and a great map, but I lacked a destination. Some of you can no doubt identify with this quandary. Others of you probably have different concerns. Maybe you have a clear goal in mind and you have creative ideas for how to get there, but you just can't seem to get started. Or maybe you have a clear goal and you have plenty of motivation, but you can't figure out what your first step should be. Or perhaps your pathway has been blocked somehow and you can't figure out how to move around the obstacle. Snyder considers each of these problems in turn and provides suggestions for how to resolve them. Let's take a look at some of Snyder's suggestions. The first problem is not having clear, well-established goals. We have already talked about steps we can all take to foster our passion to help us establish life goals. We've also talked about the kinds of goals that are likely to be conducive of well-being: intrinsic, flexible and appropriate, activity-oriented, focused on improvement versus performance, and ones that use the green side of our reversible capes. These points overlap in many ways with the suggestions Snyder makes, but I want to point out one particular piece of advice from Snyder that I think is even more important today than it was when he wrote his book. He emphasizes the importance of controlling attention robbers, as he calls them. We are continually bombarded with demands on our attention, and when we allow ourselves to be distracted by them, it can interfere with our goal pursuits. Think of being in a car heading toward your chosen destination, but as you drive, you keep seeing signs advertising attractions along the way. If you allow yourself to be diverted, you are less likely to make it to your goal. As important as selecting your goals well is keeping your attention on them as you move toward them. Snyder suggests writing down our goals on note cards and then pulling them out and reviewing them when we have waiting periods throughout the day, at the doctor's office, for example, or on the train on the way to work. Nowadays, the challenges are compounded by our smartphones, aren't they? We're carrying around powerful distractors in our pockets every day. And the temptation is to pull them out and distract ourselves when we have downtime. But our smartphones also present great opportunities. We no longer need the note card Snyder had in mind. We can just write down our goals right on our phones and have them available at any time. Keeping a list on my smartphone of my life goals and the strategies and tactics for achieving them has been a powerful way for me to stay connected to my goals once I've selected them. What happens if we have our goals and are keeping them well in mind, but are having trouble with our willpower? Here are a few of Snyder's suggestions. Instead of allowing yourself to be deflated by problems, try to think of them as challenges that motivate you. The other day, I was playing with my son Liam. I was throwing him onto his bed, and it was a little bit scary for him. He said, "Daddy, that's kind of scary," wanting me to pull back on what I was doing. But instead of doing that, I said, "I know, that's what makes it fun." He got a big grin on his face, said, "Oh, right," and came back for more. He initially thought of his fear as an indication that we should stop or scale down the activity. But when he reframed what the fear meant, he realized it actually added extra zest to the experience, and then he wanted more. The same can happen with the problems we face in trying to meet our goals. If we interpret them as meaning we will never get where we want to go, then they will likely zap our willpower. If, on the other hand, we think of them as adding extra zest to our goal pursuits, they may actually increase our willpower. A second thing Snyder suggests, if we lack willpower, is to think about our previous successful goal pursuits. During the first week of this course, I mentioned that my wife Susie helped me do this when I was feeling overwhelmed by a piece I was writing. She helped me see that this was just a normal part of the writing process for me, and that gave me renewed confidence that I would succeed with the project I was working on, just as I had succeeded with previous writing projects. Snyder also points out the connection between our physiological states and our willpower, and he emphasizes the importance of getting good nutrition, sleep, and exercise. Finally, low willpower can be a sign of depression. So if your lack of motivation persists, despite following Snyder's suggestions, you should consider seeking out a psychologist or a psychiatrist for an evaluation. Finally, Snyder gives some suggestions for bolstering your willpower if that is what is standing in the way of the achievement of your goals. Sometimes we can feel stuck because we don't know how to get started on a huge long-term goal. He suggests we break up long-range goals into smaller steps and then start by concentrating on the first of these steps. He also suggests practicing laying out different routes to your goals and then selecting the best one. Not only does this help keep us focused on our goals, but it can help us find better pathways to accomplishing them than might initially appear. In addition, it can prepare us with alternate routes if our preferred pathway becomes blocked for some reason. Snyder's final suggestion is to be willing to ask for help. Chances are there are others we can connect with who have reached our destination themselves or who have excellent advice for what steps we can take to achieve those goals. Keeping in mind these insights and suggestions from Hope Theory, let's now turn to the work of Gabriele Oettingen, a professor of psychology at New York University and at the University of Hamburg in Germany. In her book, Rethinking Positive Thinking, Oettingen begins by pointing out one thing that, surprisingly, we should actually avoid if we want to follow through on our goals. Namely, imagining that we have already attained them. A central teaching of the popular book, The Secret, for example, is that if we can imagine already having what we want, we attract it to ourselves and help make it a reality. But Oettingen's research indicates just the opposite. Those who imagine that they have already attained what they want are less motivated to take the actions necessary to get it, and consequently are less likely to make it a reality. In one study she conducted, college students with a crush on someone they were not currently dating were actually less likely to have initiated a relationship with that person 5 months later if, during the experiment, they had had a positive fantasy of connecting with that person. So if imagining that you have already completed your goal doesn't work, what does? Oettingen identifies two approaches: mental contrasting and implementation intentions. In spite of their rather academic-sounding names, these processes are actually fairly simple. Mental contrasting begins with fantasizing, but doesn't stop there. The key is to imagine as strongly as you can that you have reached a challenging but obtainable goal. Really see yourself as being there. Then immediately contrast that with internal obstacles that stand in the way of your realizing that goal. These might be thoughts or attitudes, for example, or behaviors or habits. Oettingen's research indicates that this exercise can be a powerful motivator to help you actually overcome the obstacles and make it more likely that you will reach your goal. The second effective approach for following through on our goals that Oettingen identifies in her book was actually developed by her husband Peter Gollwitzer, also a psychology professor at New York University. He has documented the effectiveness of what he calls implementation intentions. This is when you develop an if-then plan for how to handle an obstacle to your goal. If you're trying to stick to a diet, what will you do if someone offers you a cookie at work? Being clear about how you will respond to an obstacle makes it much more likely that you will respond in a way that helps you stick to your goal. When Oettingen and Gollwitzer put their research together, they came up with something that was even more effective at helping people reach their goals than mental contrasting by itself or implementation intentions by themselves. Putting mental contrasting together with implementation intentions, Oettingen and Gollwitzer have developed what they call WOOP, W-O-O-P. WOOP stands for wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. To WOOP, you begin by identifying a meaningful and attainable wish. Then you connect to the outcome by imagining you are already experiencing it. Next, you identify an internal obstacle that is holding you back from reaching this goal. Again, you imagine that obstacle as clearly and strongly as you can. Finally, you create an if-then plan for what you will do when you encounter that obstacle. You may need to make some adjustments and practice this a few times to make it work optimally for you. To help you in this process, Oettingen has thoughtfully developed a free app called WOOP, W-O-O-P, to help take you through the process step by step. WOOP, along with the hope theory we discussed at the beginning of this section, can give us strong support for following through on our goals.